Well, everyone got quiet, so I guess that means it's time to start. I know that you guys would agree with me that we feel fortunate to be in an area where that we can meet here tonight and be in this building tonight. I know we may have some joining us online tonight that are in damaged affected areas, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of areas. How many of you have lived in a hurricane affected area before? All right, several of you have, and so you know what it's like, and it can be tough. You get where we talked to some where they said, hey, they've got in cars and just cranked it up just so they could cool off with the AC and enjoy that. My father-in-law has actually a Gator that has AC on it, so that was the closest thing he had to AC for. His truck had died and battery died or whatever, so he couldn't drive his truck, but he could drive the Gator, so he'd get in it and drive it around his property a little bit to cool off. But they did get power back on last night, and so they were happy about that. And he was watching the Alabama-Georgia game last night and just assumed I was watching it. I didn't know it was being replayed, but he just assumed I was watching it again, and he was having a good time watching it last night. But I talked to some others from Valdosta today, some friends down there, and the best they have given them is possibly by Saturday. They may have power out. Have some friends at Georgia Christian School down there, and he sent me pictures of the school and the damage and of his home, and it's just tough. And I know those areas, believe it or not, that's where hurricane came in, but some of the areas further away have actually had more damage from the floods and those kind of things. And so let's keep them in mind and help where we can. I know different people are helping different places. Sarah and I will be heading down through Georgia to Florida Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday on down further. So we'll see what we get into down there. But keep all those in your prayers, and let's help out where we can. I do appreciate what Dave shared tonight from Romans 8, and it's powerful to think that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And the things that are written in the Bible are for our encouragement, and I appreciate Dave sharing that. Tonight we're in Joshua chapter 4, and we're going to try to cover Joshua 4 and 5. And I pointed out this verse at the close of our lesson last week, verse 24 of Joshua 4. And when Dave was sharing his thoughts, it made me think of this verse, that these things are written, and there's several of these types of statements throughout the Bible. We know there's one like this at the end of John that's written like this. But verse 24, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So I think these things are written. The things that we have in the Bible are written. The things in Romans 8 are written. The things here in Joshua are written, that we can know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. And if we're on God's side, that we're on a mighty side, and nothing can separate us. Nobody, no thing can separate us. Even the lack of things cannot separate us from God. Even when we think we're alone, even when we think no one is listening to us, even when we think that no one understands, God understands, and the hand of the Lord is mighty. And I hope that our study throughout this book of Joshua reaffirms that to you and helps us know that. And these things are written, we can see how God worked in the lives of these people. And it's the same God that we serve, and same power that is there. Let's take a look at Joshua 4, and we're going to kind of do this a little different this week. Instead of just reading the whole chapter, we're going to read a few verses at a time, just to set the setting. Just a reminder that last week we had where the children of Israel had come through. They're about to cross into the promised land. What was separating them from the promised land was the Jordan River. And so at the close of our lesson last week, we saw where as soon as the priest's feet touched the water, the waters piled up far away from them, and the people were walking off across on dry land. And so what we see in chapter 4 is a little bit of that kind of repeated. And we see this style of writing a little bit in Joshua where it'll tell part of the story and then it'll come back and tell a little bit more. And so that's what's happening here in chapter 4 and telling us a little bit deeper. Remember that back in the last chapter, Joshua told the people to pick out someone from every tribe, and that's going to come back into play here in chapter 4. Let's get someone to read verses 1 through 7.
This may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them, that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When he crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. So we see several things in this section. We see that the people are passing over the Jordan, and while the priests are still there, they're told to take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan. Now, you almost have to follow along real closely as to what happens here, but in these verses, what happens here is they've chosen 12 men. They're told to take out stones from there, from the midst of the Jordan, and then basically, what kind of stones, how big do you think the stones were?
Not small.
They weren't small. How do we know that? They put it on their shoulder. And so I have the feeling when they chose the men, they choose the wimpiest person among them. I have the feeling they, if you say, okay, let's pick out a stone for our tribe, you think there's a little competition there? These guys picked up, I'm just imagining, but here's this memorial of stones there of what has happened here among the people. But what's neat to me is that each tribe picked out their person that would choose their stone, and their stone was going to represent their tribe, and they're going to put them all together there, that this would be a sign for them to remember, a memorial. We've talked about several times that there's many memorials listed in the Bible. This is another example of memorial. And I think this concept of a memorial is important because there are things to remember. There's things important to remember. It's not so much what's in the memorial necessarily, as much as the principle of what they're trying to remember. That's the important thing there. And each year I take our 8th grade students to Washington, D.C., and one of the favorite things I love to do with them is to go on a night tour of the monuments. And I did that when my kids were a certain age. I wanted to wait till I knew they would remember it, and we did the same thing. We did it at night, did a whole lot of walking and those kind of things, because if you walk to all of them, it's a pretty good hike to do that. But it's just neat seeing them at night, and to me it's more moving to talk about those things and to see them. But that's what we see here in these passages, that they were to be a memorial. And so there's several lessons that I think we can learn from these verses. First of all, leaders should be representative of their constituents, not just themselves. Here, Joshua was encouraged, and he commanded the people to pick out from among them these 12 men, and it was one from every tribe. And you got to think that there had to be some pride involved with that tribe. And they said, hey, this is so-and-so from our tribe, and look at that stone, and that's the one from our tribe. You got to think later when they were talking to their kids that they had to say something about it. I remember who got that stone. It meant something. And you remember so-and-so, their grandfather, that's who got that stone out of there. But I think the overall principle is that leaders should be inclusive of others and representative of their constituents. Another important lesson I think we can learn is to always remember the victories that God has brought you through in the past. So why was this a memorial? It was a memorial of what God accomplished there. The fact that here the Jordan had overflowed its banks. It was intimidating. Can you imagine moving a large number of people across a flooded river? We've talked about floods here this last week. Can you imagine that? But can you imagine this powerful river that's overflowing its banks, like what we've seen on TV? But then as soon as a priest's feet touch it, that the water's piled up far away from them, and they walk through on dry ground. Tom, absolutely. Tom and I were talking last week after, and he said, explain to me more a little bit of what you mean by you don't quite know how God did that. And it's true, I don't know how God did that. I can't picture in my mind how that worked, how that came through. It doesn't mean I have to know how God made it. That's kind of the definition of a miracle. Those things many times, what we see in the miracle, like Russell said, there's no way it could be anything but God. But what's important about those memorials is not just to signify the event, but it's to remember this, to always remember the victories that God has brought us through in the past. Many of us have scars, and we could probably tell you what those scars meant. I've got one right here, and I know exactly where that scar. I've got one up here, 18 stitches that were up here. It just looks like another wrinkle, but I know where that scar went. There's a couple of you that I think have maybe a joint or something missing, and you know what that scar's from there. But here's what's important about those scars is not just getting through those things, not just the pain that went through, but the fact, because God brought us through that victory, He can get us through the victory, through the problem that we're in right now, through the difficulty that we're in right now. Maybe some are listening to this online that are in a tough challenge right now. But just the fact that God brought these people through that challenge is a testimony to us that He can get us through our challenge. And you think back in our lives, the things that we've been through. Some of those things we don't even want to talk about. We don't even want to think about anymore because they were tough and they're painful. But the fact that we got through them is a testimony that God can bring us through in other victories in the past. And we need to remember that. Sometimes we face new things that are different, and we don't know what that's like. But we have the assurance, because God brought us through our other things, He can bring us through the current challenge, whatever it is that we're going through in our life. And the other point on here that just jumps off the page to me, and you know I work with kids, and so this means a lot to me. Verse 6. That this may be a sign among you, when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? We should always teach our children about how God has carried us through those difficulties in our life. Sometimes we've gone through tough times, but we don't want to talk about them to our kids. And I'm not telling you just to share everything, but aren't our kids going to go through tough times in their lives? We hope they don't, but we know they are. And if our kids think that we never experienced any of those tough times, how are they going to handle those things? God told them that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? I think it's important for our kids to hear how God has got us through challenges in our life, how He's pulled us through those things. Maybe our kids don't go through the same exact challenges that we've gone through, but if they know we've gone through those challenges, it can help. Hopefully, we need to share those things with our kids because they need to know that God is working in our lives. He has carried us through those challenges in our lives. It's no doubt that it is God that has carried us through. It may not be a miracle like piling up water downstream and we walk through on dry land, but there's things. I know about some of you. You've gone through some challenges and tough times in your life.
Well, I don't think God uses miracles today, but He sure uses providence. He puts people in our lives that can get us through tough times. I mean, you all may think I'm crazy, but when I had my stroke, I was at the lodge at the camp. I was 45 minutes from the hospital. What's the chances of nurse feeding
Verse 7, then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. In other words, you need to tell them what God has done. These stones are a reminder to that. Good points. All right, let's look at verses 8 through 11. Someone else read those verses. So, how many stones were set up? So 12 were picked up out of the midst of the Jordan. They were carried over to the place where they camped, where they lodged, and they were laid down there. But then verse 9, what else happened? Joshua picked up stones out of the midst of the Jordan, and what did he do with those? Place them where the priest stood. And so there are two memorials actually set up. One that represented all the tribes. It was chosen by these men from tribes. But then we see verse 9 that Joshua took 12 stones and placed them where the feet of the priest stood to help the children of Israel remember that. And so to me, those things are neat. A couple weeks ago, we had September 11th. We had at FCA, we had chapel that day, and not to bore you with all the details, one of our Bible teachers went out to the construction area and picked up 12 stones and had one kid from every grade. He gave one stone to them, and so they came out. And so the first kid came out, first grade, and, smaller young man. Then you had one from second grade. And you could see as each grade came down out, things got a little bit quieter, but you could tell every grade was looking for their grade. Okay, who's going to represent our grade? And they didn't necessarily know who he had given the stone to, but they came, and the way they stood, it all stood, you had perfect stair step from first grade all the way up through 12th grade. And use that to talk about memorials. And here is on September 11th, and some of these, all the kids were not born during that time. It just so happened Leah, our youngest, that's about to get married, she was born on August 30th, right before September 11th. So I had just gone back to work, and I was at work when September 11th came. My brother and sister-in-law were supposed to come see the baby, and they're going to fly from, we were living around Orlando at the time, around Mount Dora, and they're going to fly from Dallas to Mount Dora, to Orlando, and 9/11 happened, and it was right when they were going to go. And they actually were on the first plane allowed to fly after then to go from Dallas to Orlando. So it was weird being in the Orlando airport. Nobody was there except for this one flight coming in was the first flight coming in. We didn't really know what time they were coming. It was all secret. All he said is, we've been told we can go to the airport. We don't know what time we're leaving, and just pick a time and that you think we're going to be coming and show up there. And that's what happened. But I always remember how long ago that was, because Leah's that old, and it's easy for me to remember. But the point is, all my point of saying that is, what memorials do you have? What things do you want your kids to remember? What things do you want to remember? I know there's some people in this room that have a little communion cup. Mine's sitting right by my nightstand where I could see it every day. And it's just a little reminder for me. The item is not necessarily important, but it's what's behind it. It's what helps you remember. Some of you have things that you want to remember. What are those things? Sometimes it's traditions that you have. My kids, we like to do chocolate chip waffles on Christmas morning and birthdays. It's not important. It's simple. But it's our thing, and my kids always, when it's their birthday, or if we hadn't seen them and they come, or we're going to have our chocolate chip waffles, they want to have those chocolate chip waffles. It's just something simple, but it means something because it specifies those things. I think these principles are mentioned right here. A couple things from verses 8 through 11. First thing, always follow instructions from God. His were detailed. Notice verse 8, and they were told specifically what to do, and those people did it. And we're going to see this same principle when we talk about Jericho. God's details were very specific, and we always need to follow his instructions. It's not just general principles. Sometimes it is, but sometimes his commands are very specific. Verse 9, I've already mentioned this. Consider setting up spiritual reminders. I think that's what we have on the first day of the week. It's a memorial. It's a reminder. It is about the juice in the unleavened bread. It's important that it's unleavened bread and juice, but it's not so much that as what it represents that is important. And so consider setting up those spiritual reminders. Some of you in your life have dealt with addictions of whatever kind. All of us have dealt with sin. Sometimes we need a reminder of a victory there. And maybe it's one day. You made it through one day. Can we do 2 days? What is it that reminds us that, hey, have we made it through 3 days of these things? 1 year, 6 months. Sometimes we need those little reminders of those things. The last lesson from here, leaders make sure that others are safe first. So everybody passed over. The priests were there bearing the ark in the midst of the Jordan, verse 10, until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people. The people passed over in haste, but notice verse 11, when all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priests passed over before the people. So I think that's a principle there. All right, someone else read for us 12 through 14. Couple principles from here. God exalts and lowers leaders. It's tough for us to understand that, but this principle is repeated in the New Testament. We need to remember that. Also, we see God's power over nature. Here, we see that principle. Next, we have verses 15 through 18. The Lord said to Joshua, command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. When the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed its banks as before. And so we see God's power over nature there. How was this crossing of the Jordan similar and different from the crossing of the Red Sea? First of all, how was it similar? Okay, water was stopped. What else? All right, and they walked through on dry ground. It wasn't mushy ground, it was dry ground.
They were escaping when they crossed the Red Sea. They're going to conquer when they cross the Jordan.
All right, that's one of the key differences. Both ways they were led by God, but one way they were escaping, the other they were conquering.
In the Red Sea, it says that God caused a strong east wind to come. There's no mention of anything here.
Okay, good point. What else?
The Red Sea used it to destroy
Okay.
them.
And how about this one?
Also used it so they could get to it.
All right. What else? Okay. First time what they have? All right. Had the fire by night and what by day? Cloud by day. This time it was the Ark of the Covenant, and really from that point on, from the time of the Ark, that symbolized God's presence there. And so we already mentioned verse 24, and to me that's a point. Why were we told these things? So that we would remember the power of the God forever. Let me jump in chapter 5 just real quick. I'm not going to read it, but what happened here, notice verse 1. As soon as all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over, how they react. Their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. In other words, the Jordan River was a pretty big barrier. And I bet they wondered, how will they get past that barrier? We're okay just as long as they stay on that side of the Jordan. They've been over there over 40 years. But when God stopped the waters and they walked through on dry land, the people, their hearts melted. They knew, here come the children of Israel. But a couple points along those lines. News of amazing things travel fast. I don't know, they didn't get a text message or email on that, but it traveled fast because we're told as soon as they heard that. I don't know how they heard those things, but this amazing news traveled fast, and it still does today. People realize when you have God behind you, and they realize that God, that one true God, was behind them. We heard that from Rahab before. After this, what happened? The people, Joshua was told by God to circumcise all the men. And it was explained that basically they had wandered in the wilderness. They had all been circumcised before they left Egypt. Is that right? No, after. They're among the issuing of the Ten Commandments, and among them, that's when they were circumcised. But they had not been there. So after they crossed the Jordan River, that's what happened there. I put down here that circumstances don't change God's commands. And so God expected this. It didn't matter the circumstances. They we're expected to follow God's command. And then the last thing I put down, as a leader, always remember you're not ultimately in charge. One of the neatest parts of chapter 5 is verses 13 through 15. Let's look at that real quick before we close. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, I'm a commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." Now Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. What does this remind you of? What now? God's with us. When else did he do this? All right. Exactly. Similar to what he did with Moses. And I would think there's something significant with that. All leaders, we need to realize we're not ultimately in charge. Here Joshua was exalted, but then he was humbled pretty quick by seeing this guy, a very powerful being. We're not told exactly who that was, but we are told that for the place that you're standing is holy. Was it Jesus? Was it an angel? What we're told, and behold, a man was standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. We know it was impressive. This person was impressive. It got Joshua's attention, but yet the commander of the Lord's army told him to take off the sandals of his feet, for the place you're standing is holy. Next week we'll look at chapter 6, Jericho. Encourage you to read chapter 6, and I'll be out of town, but Roger will present the thoughts for you.